afternoon, everyone. I'm Sadhana Sri Ramlu, Policy Officer here at ARACY. Welcome to today's webinar on Understanding Your Brain so that you can understand others by Sheryl Batchelor. I want to start first by recognizing and paying my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging from the different First Nations across this country. Before we begin today's presentation, I'll take you through a few housekeeping tips to let you know how you can participate in the webinar. As shown in the slide, we are looking at an example of what would typically appear on your screen as a GoToWebinar attendee. On the left of the screen, you can see the viewer window. This allows you to see what the presenter is sharing on their screen. On the right is the control panel, which allows you to participate in today's webinar. By clicking the orange arrow here, you can open and close your control panel. You can also click on the view menu at the top of the window to set the control panel to hide or to auto hide when it's inactive. Within the control panel is the audio pane as indicated, and here you can choose how to listen to the webinar and test your audio settings. By default, you will have joined the webinar via your computer's microphone and speakers. Highlighted is the option to check your audio setup. If you prefer, you can listen to the webinar via telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and the dial-in information you will appear, including an audio pin. If during the webinar you are experiencing audio issues with your speaker or headset, please use this option. Another pane available to you is the questions pane. Throughout the webinar, the audience will be muted. However, you can ask the presenters questions at any time by typing them in this field and clicking send. You can also raise your hand for help. Today's webinar will be about an hour, and the end of the presentation will have a Q&A session to answer as many written questions as we have time for. If you have any technical difficulties, please send your written questions to staff via the questions pane, and we will respond as soon as possible. We will be recording today's presentation, and it will be available on the ARACY's website soon. Once again, thank you everyone for joining, and I'm very pleased to introduce Sheryl Batchelor, the founder and director of Yilyapinya Indigenous Corporation, who is a genuine trailblazer in developing innovative ways to use neuroplasticity to help people improve their cognitive skills such as memory, processing speed, and attention, as well as their social skills. These are the very skills we all need to have success in school, work, and in life. Sheryl believes that brain health is as important as what we think as physical health throughout life. We need strong hearts, but as importantly, we need strong brains. Sheryl also believes that to help others develop and maintain healthy brains, we need to understand our own brains and the gene or environment interactions that influence them. In this webinar, Sheryl will talk about the importance of understanding and improving your own brain health and why this is crucial for supporting vulnerable children specifically and young people. Examples of integration and implementation of brain health, healing, and fitness programs for professionals who work with children, adolescents, and adults will be discussed along with Indigenous community-led initiatives such as the Deadly Brains program and the Deadly Brains Playgroup. Sheryl has applied neuroscience insights with kids, young people, adults, and the elderly to strengthen their brain-based capabilities. And today, she's going to describe how she does this. Over to you now, Sheryl. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's get started. So thank you everyone for signing up to listen to this today. And I'd like to just reaffirm that this is about understanding your brain so that you can understand others. And I set up Yilyapinya a couple of years ago, and Yilyapinya means brain for my moba kalamala. And it's very important to me to go back to the healing part of our Indigenous ways, to heal our brain from past trauma and to actually strengthen it and move forward. And we have a lot of resilience in that area. So first of all, I would also like to do an acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on this land on which this presentation is taking place today, and I'm here in Brisbane. And I'd also like to acknowledge the land on which you are, wherever you are across Australia today. And I'll pay my deep respect to elders past, present and future, and also like to acknowledge any elders that are in the room today. Okay, did you wake up like this morning? With your hair perfect? Maybe a little bit of lipstick on, maybe not. Nice silky pajamas. Or did you wake up like this, thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be one of those days. I've got to go to work and I bet you that person's there today. I've got to do this, this and this and this. And oh goodness, the baby's just woken up. I've hardly had any sleep. Do you turn over and look at your phone and look at how many Facebook's likes you got, Instagram, or how many emails you got to deal with, all before you get out of bed? Because the first thing in the morning matters. We have over 70,000 thoughts a day, and the brain contains billions, millions of parallel processes, and it will find the evidence it needs to support whatever you're telling yourself. So the moment you open your eyes, do you have a mindset of it's going to be a great day? Because if it is, then the brain's going to look for evidence of that. But if your brain's going, it's going to be one of those days, then it will find every bit of evidence it can to support what you're thinking. So with that in mind, do you know what happens in your body when you're stressed? So just have a think about that. What happens in my brain? What happens in my body when it's stressed? And basically, what happens is that our emotional state and our survival state kick in big time. So just looking at this brain picture, it's a very, very basic picture. There's lots of elements underneath this. But the blue part is our emotional state. It's our limbic system. That's where most of where our amygdala, hippocampus, striatum, all those really important areas of emotion are there, except empathy, which is located up in our motor cortex. And the brainstem, this regulates our heart, our blood pressure, our breathing. Those two areas of our brain get very, very upset, hyperactive or underactive when we're stressed. And when that happens, information to the top part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is where we make good decisions, where we can plan things, where we can problem solve, just doesn't kick in. So one of the things that I've learned is that when I understand my brain and I help others understand their brains, there's a bit of awakening about, oh, is this what's going on for me? So then when that happens, you get a better idea of what's going on for others. So some key areas that I explicitly teach children, youth, and mums and dads and our workforce is these areas. The prefrontal cortex, as I mentioned, that's where most of our executive function is, not all of it, but most of it is in a decision making. That's where we can sort of like say no to ourselves. The amygdala and the hippocampus and thalamus are located in our limbic system. And the amygdala is like the security guard. That's where our fight-flight response is. And it sort of like decides whether the information coming in through the thalamus and through the RAS system of our brain is safe or not. And the hippocampus is where most of our memory is stored. All of our memory is not stored there, but it's mostly stored there. The hippocampus is also where new neurons in our brain are created every single day. So if you think about the prefrontal cortex, let's just unwrap that a little bit more. And I imagine it to look like a tree. So the cognitive skills that are important in that prefrontal cortex to help us make good decisions are things like attention, self-regulation, memory, processing speed, all of that. Think of that like the roots of the tree. And they need to be strong, thick, and healthy. Because if the roots of the tree are not strong, then the top part, meaning the trunk and the branches and the leaves, which is our life, such as learning, social skills, keeping a job, sustaining a job, they just fall over. They just get weak and they die. In other words, we give up. So we need to make sure that we're keeping that bottom part of our brain, which is our top part of our brain in one sense, really healthy, thick and strong. And we'll talk about that. So some of you may have heard about executive functions, and that's located in our prefrontal cortex. And it looks at 3 key areas. However, the prefrontal cortex in regards to learning and memory and things like that is much more than just executive function, but we'll just have a look at this. So working memory is where we have to remember something in the short term, like a series of numbers, like a phone number, for example, and then get distracted and go off and do something else and come back. So it's very, very short term. It goes very quickly. Inhibition control is the ability to say no to yourself and to wait that little bit longer. And cognitive flexibility is about looking at things from a different perspectives. It's also about curiosity and creativity. So if you have really good cognitive flexibility, you can be really, really creative. If you look at the picture that you're in front of you about how these skills, because they are skills that are developed over the course of your lifespan, they develop until you're around about 20, 25, somewhere around there. And then about 5 years after that, you've got optimum brain development. So that's when you can have a really good time. That's when your brain's at its peak. But after that, it slowly starts decreasing. So in other words, we need to be using it or we're going to lose it. And working and improving our quality of life all helps us keep that part strong. But at any time, at any of us in our lifespan, get experienced to prolonged toxic stress or something happens to us like an illness or something, it changes that trajectory. So these executive functions are important for all of our life outcomes. They're important in regards to mental health, and we know that executive functions are impaired in a number of mental health disorders. Not always, but they are mostly affected in addictions, ADHD, particularly working memory with ADHD, conduct disorders, that's self-regulation, depression, OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar. There's lots of research showing that these skills, executive function skills, are compromised. But they can, that's the power of neuroplasticity, is that we can improve those cognitive skills, which I'm going to talk about. Physical health, these skills are important to being able to say no to yourself with under-eating or overeating, substance abuse, and poor treatment adherence. In other words, if we think of kids at schools, so they can learn things at schools, but can they actually apply what they've learned? So if you've been given a weight loss plan or you've been told to do something, can you actually apply it? And applying it, you need these really strong executive function skills. School readiness. Executive functions are more important for school readiness than IQ, but unfortunately we don't test it. And I know when I say testing, and I'm a school teacher and lots of experience teaching in schools for over 28 years, but this is really important. These is like the roots of the tree. If we don't test these skills, then we're going to find that children struggle. School success. Executive functions predict maths and reading competence throughout the school years, but unfortunately we don't test it. Job success. Poor executive functions leads to poor productivity and difficulty finding and keeping a job. So we can help our most vulnerable teenagers find jobs, but will they be able to keep them? Marital harmony. A partner with poor executive functions can be more difficult to get along with, less dependable, and more likely to be impulsive. And public safety. Poor executive functions lead to social problems, including crime, reckless behaviour, violence, and emotional outbursts. So there's lots of research around how those particular skills are impacted in our quality of life. Did you know that we're not born a blank slate? That nurture and nature conversation is pretty much rebuked now, because we know that all of us are affected by intergenerational trauma. Every one of us, through the passing of DNA and genetics, have had the trauma of whatever our generations have had before, and it's passed down to us. And then if you think of any bad news that happens, add on COVID at the moment, any stress, because life can be stressful, but we want to change that mindset, then the minor inconvenience, whatever that may be, can send us overboard. And then we have people around us say things like this: I think you're overreacting. I'm sure you can see yourselves in both of these situations, where you've been so stressed sometimes that just one little thing sets you off and you become very shameful and really embarrassed by it, and the shame just builds up over time. And the other time you're just going, what's that person getting upset about? Doesn't make sense. Some of you may have heard of the adverse childhood experience study. So I want to talk about this for a little bit because it adds on to what we're talking about with intergenerational trauma in regards to how brains are wired. So this study was a weight loss study. It was in America and it looked at 17,000 participants in 1995 to 1997. And what it found is that 1 in 5 people had an ACE score above 3. And it asked 10 very personal questions, and I've just got one on the screen here, basically asking is that, were you physically hurt before you were 18? And what I think alarmed me here is that it seems to be that all of us have at least one ACE score, that something has happened to every one of us that has impacted our way of being. It's impacted our behavior, it's impacted our brain health, it's impacted our body. So it's like it's normal. The adverse childhood experience is telling us that all of us have gone through some adversity. And here's just an example. If you wanted to check out the adverse childhood experiences study more, you can just do a Google search from it. But it predicts a lot of things later on in life, and this is just one example. So ACE scores and rates of antidepressants. So it's saying here that if you have 5 or more out of those 10 scores for ACE in this ACE study, that you're 94% chance of being on antidepressants later on in life. And that's quite significant. Okay, this is actually a little bit complicated, but it's actually not. But what it's really saying is that if we look at the left-hand side, it's got parent toxic stress. So parent toxic stress comes from two sides. It comes from historical and cultural trauma, like being an Indigenous person and what's happened in previous experiences, but also from your family. What's happened in your family matters. And then the social detriments of health. So did you grow up in poverty? Did you grow up in a disadvantaged community? Did you grow up in an area where you had access to services? And then add on that parent's ACE score that we just talked about. Those three things really combined leads to parental toxic stress. And that's passed down generation to generation. And what happens is it changes the body and it changes the brain in all different ways. And then that's passed on to your next child, and then the cycle starts again. But through the power of neuroplasticity, we can turn around at any stage and say, no, enough's enough, I'm going to rewire my brain. This is a functional MRI scan of 2 brains. On the left, you see a negative brain scan, and on the right is a positive scan. Now, the reason why they're negative and positive is because it's looking at blood flow. If you look at the dark blue, the scale in the middle, you can see that there's a spectrum between blue and all the way up to pink. On the left-hand side, you can see the very, very middle, it's red and a little bit of pink. That's the limbic system. On the right-hand side, you can see that that person's limbic system is also a bit red. So we've got 2 stressed people here whose limbic system's going a bit nuts. But look at the prefrontal cortex. Go up to the top and you can see that on the left-hand side, there's no red and pink. In other words, there's not much blood flow to that top part of the brain. Whereas the right-hand side, there's lots of blood flow. It's pink, it's red, it means there's blood there. That means the person on the right can say no to themselves. They can turn around and say, okay, I'm going to problem solve this. I can use my working memory. I'm going to see things from different perspectives. Whereas the person on the right neurologically cannot do that. So we're asking the person on the right sometimes, I want you to stop doing this. I want you to learn this. We're setting the bar up sometimes with those people that have brain scans like that so high that it's unreasonable to expect them to be able to do it until we improve their brain health. In other words, getting more blood flow and more connections to the top part of the brain. Now, any one of us can move from the left side to the right side, back to the left at any time in our life. Every one of us. In fact, every one of us is somewhere between the negative brain and the positive brain. And it works on a pendulum. We're up and down that sometimes during the day and in our life. But what we want to do to make sure that we stay strong and healthy is making sure we have blood flow to that top part of the brain. Now, how do we do that? How do we go from surviving to thriving? There's 4 key areas that I've learned. And as I said, I've been a teacher and I've really got very frustrated with not being able to help kids until I understood this. And I'll share some of those things with you as we go along. So understanding your brain so you can understand others is the most important thing. We need to understand our behaviour. And our behaviour comes from understanding our own brain. We need to teach others about their brain and this wonderful power of neuroplasticity. We need to co-regulate and teach how to change the brain stem and the limbic reactivity and underactivity, and strengthen this prefrontal cortex, strengthen those roots of the tree, the cognitive skills that are so important for us to have a healthy quality of life as we age. So the first thing we need to do is I'm going to ask you to do this little working memory test. I'm going to give you a number, and then I'm going to ask you a maths question. And I'd like you not to write down any of those things. This is just a listening activity. After I've given you the number, I'd like you to say the number backwards to yourself. Now, unfortunately, there's so many of us, we can't put this into a chat because that would be really good if we could do that. But let's just see how you go. So first of all, I'll just say that again. I'm going to give you a number. You have to remember the number. Then I'm going to ask you a maths question, and I'd like you to answer the maths question aloud. And then I'd like you to say the first number I gave you backwards. All right, let's see how we go. The number is 0, 4, 1, 3, 4, 8, 7. Okay, aloud now. 73 plus 5 equals 75. Now say the number, the first number I gave you, backwards out loud. I'll give you a second to have a go. Okay, let's do it together. 0, 4, 1, 3, 4, 8, 7. How did you go? That's what working memory is about. It's being able to hold something in there, do that little maths question, and then manipulate that data in a very short amount of time. Now, I gave you a long number then, that was 7. But we expect kids to do that, and we expect adults to do that. And some of us, when we're stressed, our working memory just freezes. So just think about yourself just then. Did your working memory freeze? Did you just say to yourself, oh, I'm just not going to do this. This is just too hard. Did anyone say, I'm just going to run to the bathroom, like do a bit of a runner? Did anyone get really angry and go, I didn't come along to do this webinar to do a test? So thinking about how you reacted then. Do some people react as soon as you say test, they just go, oh, into brain freeze. So that means that you went straight to that middle part of the brain, and the cognition part of your brain just sort of like went into a freeze. Let's move on from working memory and have a look at what's called brain health screening. So when I'm talking about looking at your brain health, this is what I'm talking about, is looking at, and this is one brain health screener that's peer reviewed. There's lots of them. There's about 6 or 7 of them that's really good to have a look at brain health screening, and it's just a screener. It's not a full cognitive assessment. It's a moment in time that gives you a snapshot. And the way I see this is like getting on the scales and saying, what do I weigh today? Oh, okay, I need to do something. So off I go and look at my eating, and off I go and do some exercising, and I'm checking in on myself along the way. Where do we get an opportunity to check in on our cognition? Because this matters. It matters for our quality of life across the lifespan, and more importantly, if you are in the helping profession, how you work with others. So let's look at these skills here. So things like working memory, processing speed, sustained attention, recall memory, executive function, they all matter. But look down further, identifying emotions, emotional bias, we can measure all that. Now, have a look at motor coordination. This is another area that some really good research is coming out about, and it's linking to helping us calm the middle part of the brain as well as the brain stem, is that when we're using the iPad and the computers, especially the iPads and our phones, this finger is getting super duper strong. Our motor skills and our fine major motor skills and our fine motor skills are so important, especially as we age, and certainly as they help us regulate our emotions, because they are at the top part of our brain. So they're really, really important to keep strong, but unfortunately we're not doing enough of that. I'll come back and talk more about that as we go along. Brain health screening, we can also do brain health screening for littlies. You may have heard about the marshmallow test. So this is looking at self-regulation. So can a child sit there and delay gratification? So in other words, they're given them one marshmallow and they said, if you wait 15 minutes, I'll give you another one. So can a child sit there and say no to themselves? So I ask you the same thing. Can you say no to yourself? Talk a little bit more about that. But in regards to this brain health screening, we're doing this in schools and we're doing this in our playgroups. So we have a Deadly Brain Playgroup set up where we're running brain health screening for our young people and to see how their self-regulation is, and then do an intervention. That's usually based on computer and non-computer based activities. It's really important we do both, not just computer-based activities. And then also for the parents, we're also doing this as well. But more importantly, before we even work with the kids and the parents, the workforce need to do this. So we've got non-teaching staff in schools, we've got child protection staff, youth justice staff, Queensland Police. We've got all different people doing brain health screening, because this matters. If we don't get our own brain health under order, it will impact the way that we help others and have relationships with others. This is some brain health screening that we've done in a school for years 3 to 6. We did this a couple of years ago. And you can see very clearly here that in year 3, there was 166 kids. 50% of them had low working memory. So in other words, they could remember this: Sheryl, I want you. That's it. After that, they've lost it. They're going to get distracted by what's going on in the classroom. Overall, out of 600 kids, 44.5%. Now, this correlated very much to their academic performance and their behaviour. But we're not looking at this in the classroom. What we're doing is we're just giving them more of the same. More of the same is not going to necessarily improve the roots of the trees. And as I mentioned, we're doing this for adults. And then we're looking at the data of this going, okay, do we have a stressed workforce? Because if we have a stressed workforce, it's going to impact their cognition, and it's going to impact the way that they deal with children and get along with others in the workplace. So the teaching others about the brain and the power of neuroplasticity is really important. And there's lots of really good books out there on this. You just do a Google search about how to teach brains and you'll find some fantastic videos and some fantastic resources. So what I want to say is this power of this neuroplasticity, it's just so important to teach kids this and everyone this, is that the brain that you woke up with this morning is not the brain that you're going to go to bed with tonight because of your experiences during the day, whether they were positive or negative. And as you can see here from the slide, we want our brains to look like what's on the right. In other words, lots of connections mean lots of blood flow to the top part of the brain. We also need to help co-regulate and teach how to change the brainstem and limbic reactivity. And we do this through adults because adults need to buffer, reset and repair the brain's sensitivity and help move people from toxic stress to tolerable stress. But you can't do that if you're in the toxic stress state yourself. Mirror neurons, some of you may have heard about this. It's located in our motor cortex, and that's what I was talking before about. We need to test our motor cortex and find out how it's going. And we need that because empathy is located in our motor cortex. So children mirror parents, carers, and children. Students mirror their teachers. Teachers mirror students. So in other words, if I walk into my classroom and I'm cranky, it's going to set that off with the kids. If I walk on into my classroom unhappy and the kids are cranky, it means that I have to do a lot of work in trying to calm those brains down because they're mirroring different kids in the room. It's not that their brains are going nuts, it's just that there's a mirror system there that we react to, and it's really, really important that we work on our motor cortex to improve our empathy and our motor skills and our mirror movements. So conversations, the way we talk to each other matters, and this is a really good one. So up the top there, you've got the blue for oxytocin producing behaviour. Their oxytocin is one of those really they call it the love drug. It's a feel-good chemical you get from cuddling your partners and being in love with people. And the parts in the red down there you can see is to do with cortisol-producing behaviours. Now let's just have a look at this. And as we're doing this, think about yourself. Are you a person that has concern for others, truthful about what's on your mind? You stimulate discussion and curiosity. You paint a picture of mutual success, and you're open to difficult conversations. Or are you someone that you don't trust others' intentions? You focus on convincing others of your way. Others are not understanding to you. You pretend to be listening, but you're really looking at your phone, thinking about something else. All of those are cortisol behaviours for yourself, and because of our mirror system, they mirror it off to the other people in the room. So the other people will be getting a cortisol release from your behaviour. Have a look at this one, theory of mind. I know what you're thinking about terrible things about me. Well, screw you and your judgments. I'm thinking about pie. This has happened to you sometimes? And it goes back to theory of mind. In other words, your brain just looking at things. So if you go back to that brain health screener we were looking at before, there's a picture in one of the exercises and you have to say whether it's happy, sad, anger or whatever. And when I ask people to tell me how they come up with the answers, they say, oh, I just looked at their eyes, I just looked at their mouth. And some of the time they were right, some of the time they were wrong. But when we looked at emotional bias, in other words, looking at two different faces, could they, with the same emotion, could they tell the difference? And they couldn't tell the difference a lot of the time. And as you're in the helping industry, the longer you're in the helping industry, whether that be child protection, youth justice, or teachers or whatever, the worse your emotional bias is. Because your brain just goes, eyes, mouth equals this emotion, and you don't think twice about it. Ways that we can calm the brain down, particularly the brainstem, is using rhythm. A lot of the times we tell people just calm down, but we don't actually tell them how to do it. Here's a couple of YouTube clips that are really good. If you have a look at Bond University, they've got this wonderful worldwide stress release study going on at the moment, looking at short little activities that can calm the brainstem and the limbic system so you can get more blood flow back up the top part of the brain. So you can register for that, or there's some little YouTube clips that you can do. Tapping is really great. There's some really good evidence around about tapping, and that's because not only does it the meridian, but it actually uses the motor cortex, because you've got to use your hands and your fingers. And that's another reason why it's really good. So have a look at some of those YouTube clips. Now, can you say no to yourself and follow through? This is one of the most important things you can do for yourself to get more blood flow back up to the brain quickly, is to say no to yourself. And when you follow through with that, it increases your dopamine, increases your serotonin. It feels good. You don't feel any shame. Now, I've just put food there, but it could be something very, very simple as the other day I drove down the Gold Coast. I said to myself before I left, I'm going to get some petrol when I get there. So all the way down there, my brain kept saying, petrol, petrol. It was on the radar looking out for a petrol station. Every time it saw one, petrol, stop, stop, stop. I kept saying, no, I'm going to get some petrol when I get there. Basically, what was happening is my middle part of the brain was saying, if you don't get petrol, you're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to run out of petrol and someone's going to hit you. You're going to die. Really, we know that that's not the case. That's just that brainstem going a bit nuts. So, well, the limbic system going a bit nuts. Now, I knew that, and I knew to keep pushing myself through it. So think of some examples of how you can say no to yourself. The other thing you can do is how can you help people say no to themselves? A lot of the time, we scaffold the no. In other words, in schools and in other places, we say, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. Think of ways you can help people problem solve and know for themselves. And that could be as simple as asking them a question such as what's going well and what would you do differently? So asking questions help them go through that metacognition. They're thinking about thinking. Distractions wire our brain negatively. And we talked about that before, is that when you're trying to do something and you are focused on something else and you're not paying attention, it wires our brains negatively because it increases our cortisol. Multitasking is toxic for the brain. And you thought that you were good at it. There's only about 1% of the human race that can actually do two things at once. What our brains does is it shifts its attention from one task to another and then back again. And how long it goes from one task to another and then comes back depends on your brain speed. It also depends on your attention and whether you've got focusing attention or you've got wide view attention. But basically, multitasking stresses our brains out and uses a lot of energy. We don't have time for that activity because I want you to have an opportunity to ask some questions. But there's a little activity if you wanted to do at another time about how you can't get your both hands to try and do something independently, because it just doesn't happen. Our brains can't do two things at once. We think we're doing it. So what we need to do is strengthen those neural pathways up the top part of our brain so they down-regulate the limbic system and the brainstem. We want strong pathways up the brain and down the brain across the lifespan. And we know that some of the things that we're already doing in the helping profession, like increasing our joy, increasing our physical fitness and feeling good and everything helps us. But there's this other direct route that I was talking about in strengthening our cognitive skills. And that's looking at evidence-based, peer-reviewed cognitive programs. Because a healthy brain is a smarter brain, and that processing speed matters. Can't just focus on working memory. We need to focus on attention, brain speed, and memory. And mind you, underneath those are lots and lots of different areas. But we know when we improve some of those higher cognitive areas that they help other underlying areas. So this is about looking at a faster brain as a smarter brain, whereas a noisy brain, in other words, someone who's anxious and constantly worried, some of those mental health disorders, is a slower brain. Their processing speed is slower. And what that means from a brain scan, a functional MRI scan, as we're looking at here, it means blood flow. There's not much blood flow. There's not much connections in the front part of the brain. So if you look at this before training, you can see that there's not much blood flow in 100 milliseconds. 200, we've got some. 300, it goes. It doesn't hang along very long. Whereas after training, you can see much more blood flow. In other words, the brain's working so much faster. This person can think faster, means that they can say no to themselves and they can stop themselves, they can problem solve. That's what we want to be able to do with our own brains as well as everybody else. This is one cognitive program that's peer-reviewed that you might want to check out. It works for children as well as some adults, and there's some fantastic research around this one, CogniFit. There's a vast of them, but all I say is don't just go and have a look at some, look for the research, but not all cognitive programs are the same. They're apples and oranges. You want good peer-reviewed stuff. And the other thing is making it very personalised. That's why the brain health screening process is so important, because we need to understand ourselves so that we can improve our cognition and work out which areas of our brain are stressed and which ones we need to move the bar on. So when we do get stressed, we're still able to remember and to do things and keep ourselves calm. Then we can help other people. So just in summing up, some things that you can do today. So brain health is everybody's business. So what we're doing in projects, we're working in Indigenous communities, we're working in schools, we're working in child protection and youth justice and police space. Then this is about all workers understanding their brains and how their brains are impacted by stress and what happens in their brain when they're stressed and what they can do to move the dial, make their brains healthier. So your morning routine matters. How you set your day up matters. Practice waiting longer. Practice saying to yourself no. Because when you do that, you increase your self-esteem, because it means that I can do this. I can wait that bit longer. Engage in cognitive training. But before you do that, you've actually got to do a brain health screening process so you know where your strengths and weaknesses are. And engage in more activities involving your motor skills. Handwriting. Don't talk to me about technology, because technology is really important, but we do need to practice our fine motor skills and our major motor skills. They're really important. And so just the last slot there, we talked about those 4 areas very, very briefly here, but there is a process, and this is the power of neuroplasticity, is that we can shift people from those scans I showed you before, from negative to positive. It can happen. We just need to be able to work with these people, but we need to understand ourselves first. And some other key messages that I've learned about brain science is that brains are built from the bottom up, and strong foundations are essential, just like that root to the tree. Toxic stress shapes our brains and bodies in ways that can have a long-term effect unless we understand it, turn around and say, I'm going to improve my brain health. Genes and experiences work together to construct our brain architecture, but it's malleable. Toxic stress is a health condition that's amenable to treatment, and cognitive skills can be strengthened with specific training, both motor skills as well as paper-based exercises, strategies, and specific cognitive training using the computer. So just some reflections that I'd like you to think about is that, what can you start doing now for yourself? What are you going to stop doing? And what are some things that you can continue to do, because you're already doing some really good things? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for listening. I'd like to open it up now to any specific questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much, Sheryl, for the really exciting and interesting presentation. We do have a few questions, but before I actually dive into the questions, we've just got a few comments from attendees asking if this would be available. So just to reiterate, the slides will be made available. You'll be on our on the ARACY website, and it will be going out in our newsletter tomorrow as well. So you can, if you have not already registered and signed up for a newsletter, feel free to, and you will be receiving all it's a recorded session, so you should be able to receive the slides on there. So Sheryl, we've got some really interesting questions coming in, and I'm gonna just throw them to you. So the first question we have is from Eric, and the question he's asked is, does playing music in the background help the brain to do mental tasks while you're working?
The music, if it depends on the type of music and also how your brain's wired. So for example, if you've grown up with heavy metal music, then the drumming of that music can help calm your brain. But if you haven't grown up with listening to heavy metal music and you've got heavy metal music playing in the background and your brain's not used to it, then that can actually elevate your heart rate. But there is some really good science out there that there's one particular music that reduces anxiety by 65%, and that's called Weightless. So you can check that out. Just do a Google search for Weightless, and you can listen to the music, because what that music does is that it has rhythm, and we know that rhythm, especially if it's got a certain type of rhythm, correlates with our heart. It's called heart coherence. So when you've got a heart rate and environment that's like this, it calms your brain stem down, and it calms your brain, that amygdala system down. So in answer to Eric's questions, it depends on that brain, what type of music it's been used to. Now in the classroom, we're talking about in a classroom, then it's completely different, because you actually shift in regards to learning. Some kids will shift from listening to the music to the task, and some will be looking at their task but actually be listening to the music. So in some cases, the music actually doesn't calm them down. It actually shifts their attention and escalates them because they're not getting their work done.
Thank you, Sheryl. I'm just trying to actually try and bundle up as many questions as I can, because we do have quite a number of questions coming in, which is amazing. And so another question is from Leanne, around, are there any specific programs we can use with very young children and their parents?
Yeah, so So what I would say there is that if you're working with children and parents, it has to be 2-generational. So what we've done is we've set up a Deadly Brains Playgroup for young people. So the Deadly Brains Playgroup works in different ways, but there's one particular group that we've set up, and that is where we can test the kids from 3-year-olds and do an intervention over a 10-week period while doing it in a playgroup. And then we're doing the brain health screeners for the parents and actually improving their brain health as one. So that 2-generational stuff can help with, serve and return, attachment, all those yummy, yummy things, while both of them are improving their cognition. And then the activities that go with that are based on Lego. So we use Lego there as the means of coming together and using those fine motor skills and motor cortex. So now that particular program, you can email me and I can tell you some if you want to. I don't think my email is just cheryl@yilyapinya.org.au. But we have different playgroups coming up with different things. So feel free to email me. I can tell you a bit more.
Thanks, Sheryl. Another question we've got is from Claire around, so Claire works in early childhood, and the question she's got is, are there any sort of good resources that you would suggest for children under the age of 5?
Yes, definitely. That's what we're doing in the playgroup. So feel free to email me, or I don't think we can put up any particular links, but the Harvard Child Development Center at Harvard, if you just look at their website on executive function, they have some beautiful videos there and some resources that you can give to parents to help them that can improve executive functions for little kids. But as I said about playgroups, if you want to have a playgroup that's really focused on cognition, email me. I can tell you some things that I just told you about with the playgroups. There's lots we can do in the early childhood space about prevention, but I'm still hearing about people talking about the children. But really, it's about we need to get ourselves brain health working really well, because in a sense, the children are mirroring us and we're also mirroring the children.
Yeah. Awesome. And Sheryl, the screeners that you mentioned, are they freely available?
No, unfortunately, you have to pay for them. They're cheaper than the big psychometric assessments, but the psychometric assessments are really important as well. But if there's something that we can do that's a bit cheaper than a full cognitive assessment, so we can just say, right, this is where that person's at, today. They're not like this is where you're going to be forever. But unfortunately, they do come with a price. And there's a few out there, but as I said, just make sure you look for stuff that's always research-based and peer-reviewed and normed to Australian children and adults.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sheryl. And so we've got a couple of questions around stress and altered mental state. So the question we've got is from Carly around, can a certain level of stress or altered mental state be beneficial?
A certain amount of healthy stress, which is the thing that they talk about. Absolutely. We all know that. Remember that slide I showed her that we've got, tolerable stress is good. Sorry, it's not really tolerable. I can't remember what it was. So a little bit of stress is good. Then you've got tolerable and toxic. You do need a little bit of stress. In fact, when you're learning, you actually need to have a bit of stress, a bit of ambivalence there. So your brain goes, oh, what am I going to do about this? So, a little bit of stress is actually really good for your brain.
Thank you, Sheryl. Sorry, I'm just trying to actually find other questions and trying to pose them to you. Okay, we've got one from Debbie, which is acknowledging adverse childhood experience, regardless of the amount of ACEs. Resilience seems to be an important factor. Is there a correlation between executive functioning and resilience?
Absolutely. And if you have a look at the research around those executive function slide that I show, there's definitely a correlation between executive functions and increased resilience, because executive function is the prefrontal cortex. And we want that strong because that's where resilience is. So resilience is not really located in those, the limbic system and the brainstem. It's located here where I can feel good about myself. I can, come back from adversity. And, the difference that some people have, 10 out of 10 for ACE scores, and you sort of think, how have they got really good resilience? Is that because they've had really good nurturing and really good things that have happened to them along the way, and they've been able to change their brains in different ways, which is so exciting. Power of neuroplasticity if used in the right way.
Thank you, Sheryl. I'm aware of the time. We've just got about 6 to 7 minutes, and we do have quite a number of questions, but I'm just going to be maybe taking one depending on how we go with your response, Sheryl. But if there is more time, I'll take more. Otherwise, feel free to, email Sheryl with the questions you have, as she's, happy with she's provided her email address, and we will be providing her email address as well when the slides are out. So the final question, Sheryl, is from Anita, and she's asking that you mentioned doing cognitive training, that, part of that is to do a brain activity evaluation first. And where would a good place to do that? What's the starting point?
That's actually a really good question. And it's a tricky one because I don't think there is any place that's actually where you can go to get a cognitive screener done without costing a lot of money and going to, and I'm not bagging psychologists or anything, but, educational psychologists or psychologists, you can go to them to get those brain health assessments done. But I would love to see more screening done, like at gyms. I did a workshop the other day at gyms. Physical health and brain health go together. So unfortunately, there's no, places where, unless someone knows a place, please let me know, and please share it with the group of where you can just go and get your brain health screening done. We do it as part of our services, where we, and because we're a not-for-profit registered charity in the NDIS space, we do a lot of clients in the NDIS space looking at brain health screening that way, because they're funded by NDIS to do that. But it would be really something that someone could take off on a commercial basis, maybe.
Thanks, Sheryl. I think we've just got a few more minutes for another final question. So this question is from Sarah. What are some simple activities, resources you can use for cognition training that aren't online?
Yes, so for example, tracing. Do you remember, I remember this, showing my age here, but back when I was in high school and I learned geography, you had to use tracing paper and trace over something, trace over the maps. And that tracing is so important. So you get a colouring in book or something, a mindfulness book, and actually trace over the exercise, trace over the picture before you colour in, because tracing uses your fine motor skills. It's actually calming because it actually slows you down. You want to do it nice and slowly, and it can calm you down as well. So tracing will be the first thing. The second thing is that walking on uneven surfaces fast is actually really good for your brain as well. Another one, as I said before, practicing saying no to yourself. Waiting, making yourself wait longer for things. It's not about gratification. It's about that you're feeling good, that you're being able to keep a promise to yourself. So I hope those little tips happen. I'm just wondering, and just in this last minute, maybe I just give a quick summary of some of the projects that we're working on, so people can see how you can apply this in different settings. Would that be okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So as I said, schools we're doing, and so when we're working with schools, we work with the leaders of the schools, teachers of the schools, and then the students. So we don't go straight to the students first, and it's really important about that the adults need to understand their own brains so they can help the kids. In child protection, youth justice, it's all about the adult brains, because us adults can sabotage the kids' improvements in cognitive functioning if we don't understand our own brains. So I just want to put that out there. That sounds really like, what's going on here? But that's the learning that I've learned over all these years of doing this, is that if I don't get my brain health in order, then I actually could stuff some of the kids up a long way.
Thank you so much, Sheryl, for taking the time today to come and give us this wonderful presentation. We've got so many comments about how terrific this has been. So thank you once again. And thank you again, folks, for joining us today. We couldn't really get to as many questions as we thought, but really great questions coming in. And as we mentioned, we've already put in Sheryl's contact details, her email address on the chat. So feel free to get in touch with her. And if you haven't already, please feel free to go into our website at ARACY and sign up to our newsletter. And this will be made available on the website as well. And we do have sessions like this every now and then, so feel free to join us. And thank you again, and wish you all a lovely week ahead. Have a good one, guys.
Thank
See
you,
you, Sheryl.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.